The best way to capture moment is to pay attention. This is how we cultivate mindfulness. Namaskar, good morning, and suswagatam. Owing to the prevailing circumstances and the ensuing restrictions, we are conducting first International Research Conference on Mindfulness 2022 in virtual mode. So I, Professor Nanda, on behalf of the entire IIM Bodh Gaya fraternity, warmly welcome everybody who is here with us physically and virtually. A very hearty welcome to Dr. Vinita Sahai, the Director, IIM Bodh Gaya, the keynote speakers, the faculty members, and the conference participants at Indian Institute of Management, Bodh Gaya. IIM Bodh Gaya, the 16th member of IIM fraternity, fosters a culture and curriculum that focuses on producing socially responsible managers and mindful leaders for tomorrow. It gives us immense pleasure and happiness to host our first ever International Research Conference on Mindfulness, that is ICRM, under the aegis of Samatvam and the guidance of Honorable Director Dr. Vinita Sahai Ma'am and the coordinators Dr. Nidhi Mishra and Dr. Tina Bharti. It is not a secret that the pandemic has created a stressful work environment for everyone. The need of this hour is to bring scholars, practitioners, and researchers together to interact and share their experience and research in the different areas of mindfulness in a business context, and to take little steps or strides towards equanimity. And our journey towards finding this equanimity, the calmness, starts with following the light within us. Let light lead the path. As tradition, we began the proceedings of the conference with the rendering of Saraswati Vandana. We invoke Goddess Saraswati, the goddess of learning and the knowledge, to bless us and to guide us for the success of what we are about to undertake. I would like to request Professor Soumyajyoti Banerjee and Professor Tamali to render the Saraswati Vandana, please. May I also request Dr. Vinita Sahai, Director, IIM Bodh Gaya, Dr. Nidhi Mishra, and Dr. Tina Bharti, Conference Conveners, IRCM 2022, to kindly light the inaugural lamp to mark the auspicious beginning of the conference.
माता सरस्वती शारदा
माता सरस्वती शारदा
हे माता सरस्वती शारदा
विद्यादानी दयानी दुःख हरिणी जगत जननी ज्वालामुखी माता सरस्वती शारदा
हे माता सरस्वती शारदा विद्यादानी दयानी दुःख हरिणी जगत जननी ज्वालामुखी माता सरस्वती शारदा हे माता सरस्वती शारदा कीजे सुदृष्टि कीजे सुदृष्टि सेवक जान अपना इतना वरदान दीजे तान ताल और आलाप बुद्धि अलंकार शारदा हे माता सरस्वती शारदा विद्यादानी दयानी दुःखहरिणी जगत जननी ज्वालामुखी माता सरस्वती शारदा हे माता सरस्वती शारदा हे माता सरस्वती शारदा
और बताइए कितने का डाला आपने? का डाला
शुभम करोति कले
मिला कितने का डाला
आशाय दीपयोति नमस्तुते. I salute the Supreme, who is in the light of that lamp and brings auspiciousness, prosperity, knowledge, and abundance of wealth. Thank you very much, distinguished ladies, for lighting the lamp and formally inaugurating the conference. Moving ahead to the awaited session of this conference, I would like to invite Dr. Nidhi Mishra, coordinator of the conference, professor in OPHR, and also the chairperson of Samatvam, the Mindfulness Center of IIM Bodh Gaya, to say a few words. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, Dr. Nanda. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Honorable Director, Dr. Vinita Sahai, distinguished guests and dignitaries, participants and audiences. I am Dr. Nidhi Mishra, and on behalf of IIM Bodh Gaya, heartily welcome you all to the first International Conference on Mindfulness 2022. In recent years, an increasing trend can be observed in mindfulness practices and training as a technique for organizational well-being, as a means for reflection and learning, and as a human resource practice, improving social relationships in the workplace, increasing employee resilience and productivity, developing emotionally mature and socially responsible managers, and to address the new normal. VUCA, volatile, complex, ambiguous, and uncertain environments create stressful work environment for employees, managers, and leaders alike, requiring them to make quick decisions amid uncertainties and insufficient information. To resolve ongoing issues, and probably mindfulness could be a way to answer some of the management and socially relevant questions of current times. The need of the hour is to resolve this issue and bring together researchers, practitioners, and academicians to come together and share their experiences and learnings from each other. The idea was to provide an opportunity to discuss how the concepts of mindfulness can be incorporated in the workplace to create organizations that are truly mindful. With this thought, we at IIM Bodh Gaya planned this conference, and we are delighted that we have got a massive response from the academia and practitioners. We are proud to share that we have extremely talented, erudite, and experienced patrons, renowned keynote speakers, and an exciting and diverse pool of research papers on board. I am sure that over the next 2 days, we will have enthralling presentations, Q&A sessions, and keynote addresses. I wish the paper presenters the best of luck. I once again welcome you all, our honorable guests and dignitaries, and hope that we all take away something valuable from this conference. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Now, I would like to share a few words about our director, ma'am, Dr. Vinita Sahai. Ma'am is the founder director of Indian Institute of Management, Bodh Gaya. She is the second woman in the country appointed by Government of India to head an IIM. Prior to joining IIM Bodh Gaya, she was the professor of marketing at IIM Raipur. She had also been a visiting professor at Aarhus University, Denmark, for over a decade and has widely traveled the world. She has extensive experience in teaching, research consulting, and executive education. Now, I would like to invite the director, ma'am, to deliver inaugural speech. Welcome, ma'am.
Thank you, Nanda. You would actually set the tone for the event by just paying attention to the word attention, and thank you so much for that. So here we are. Professor Richard Burden, sitting, I think, 7 seas across the world. My faculty colleagues, conference delegates, and of course my very, very dear students. It's a huge pleasure and privilege to enjoy your presence on this inaugural session of the first international conference that Samatvam is holding on the theme of mindfulness. Let me share the journey, how it began. 2018 is when, as a group, as a founding faculty group, we started thinking as to what we should be there for. As we know that we are among a chain of brilliant institutions called IIMs, 16th one of them. And since I'm from marketing background, I was always kind of wondering, along with my team, as to what should be that value proposition that we should be known for. We had preceding sister institutions. Some of them were known for public policy, some of them were known for decision sciences and the works. So we started wondering that what should be that theme. And you know what? The biggest stakeholders, in their own beautiful ways, had already decided that. I remember when I had joined, the first founding batch had already started calling this institution and the enlightening IIM. Believe me, at that point of time, did not resonate with us. We thought students have just picked it up from the legacy because this is known as a land of enlightenment. And we did not take it seriously. I think my team is witness to the fact that we ourselves were not very convinced that whether we can really call ourselves that big name. And the journey continued. And I guess it was in 2021, 22, 26th January, we all were sitting like here. And our students once again were showing us some presentation in which again, with that leaf, they had written the enlightening IIM. And I think this time, my team, with the consensus, embraced it. And Amrish knows that since then, or Manaswita knows that since then we've decided, okay, hashtag the enlightening IIM. It has taken us these years because meanwhile, we were preparing right from that vision exercise where we decided that mindfulness is the core value. And why mindfulness is the question. Simple as that. We are in the business of management. And management schools have been talking about so many M's, managing money, managing material, managing manpower, and so on and so forth. And yes, we should not be saying that we did not make progress, but we did make progress. But increasingly, we were recognizing that something else needs to be managed. Yes, we were managing manpower, but it was more in terms of horsepower. It was more in terms of productivity. It was more in terms of what to do and how to get it done. So the slogans were all about Six Sigma, JIT, this, that, fund flow analysis, data analysis, and the works again. Nobody was talking about, perhaps in as many ways, about managing the mind. And I think 2020, that precipitation of humankind, if I can say, we've talked enough about it, that what has happened to us since 2020. But what really became, if we look into the lives of two major stakeholders, students, see what has really happened is that laptop and that mobile has become be all and end all. It has everything. It has all the valuable lessons, but it has everything else also possible in the universe, including entertainment, information, and whatnot. Same goes for you as faculty researchers. That yes, the laptop was the reason for existence, but it was also the biggest source for distraction, if we can use the word. And increasingly, as and when the knowledge economy was growing, where it was less to do with doing, but more to do with being, increasingly humans were suffering. Humans were struggling. And we thought, we are a school of management. So, can we come up with something which helps humanity to manage this? I know it's a very tall statement to make, but as I said, the steps are in the right direction. Why we started that? Because we could see that cry in our target audience, if I can call it, our students, where increasingly we were seeing that though the jobs and the responsibilities and everything else wanted them to concentrate, wanted them to hold on to their awareness. Awareness, as we understand, is that laser light or that beam that we put on anything. But we were struggling. So the point was, we could hear our students almost bashing themselves on a daily basis. I could hear my young colleagues bashing themselves on a daily basis. Ma'am, I'm not able to do it. Somehow this is beyond us. So it was not about anything outside. It was something within that they were kind of struggling with. And which is where we started wondering that all our lives that we keep telling people, concentrate. Right from kids we've been hearing these words. Concentrate on your food, concentrate on your studies, concentrate on your work, concentrate on your research. So people like me, directors, were telling the young faculty, concentrate on your research, but wonder, were we even having this conversation that, okay, how do we concentrate? And that is where, when we started, and again, we all understand concentration is nothing but this ability to hold on to your attention or your awareness on a specific thing for an extended period of time. And we were not able to do it. So we thought, okay, if this is something which we need to teach our students, then how do we do it? And again, the lessons came from the land where we belong, land of enlightenment. We recognized that for this activity, you don't have to do something else because we are already so much of doing. Perhaps what is needed is something which we are doing currently, if we can just, because see, what is concentration? It's a whole exercise. It's a whole, I would say, why we are not able to concentrate? First of all, we were never taught how to concentrate and we were not even practicing it. And we were not even ready to include another one more practice into our lives because we were already doing so much. So there was no room, we were chock-a-block. So the wisdom lied in that there is something which is most recurring in our life. what is the most recurring thing in our lives? Our own breath. So, somewhere if during the day, if we can concentrate on our breath and give ourselves this much needed practice, see, simple as that. It's not that we are not capable of concentrating. We were not able to concentrate because we were practicing distraction. Distraction which is there with us all the time in form of our phones and in form of our gadgets that we are surrounded with. So we need to practice concentration. And we all know whatever we practice, we become adept at that. And how do we do it? We just learn it. So since yesterday, there was a beautiful conference yesterday. And let me tell you, yes, all of them were Westerners. No, there were one Indian as well. Or rather 2 Indians, 2 people of Indian origin. But somebody wrote it on our LinkedIn yesterday that you people are in land of enlightenment and you are, why is that you have all the foreign people coming and talking about something which inherently belongs to us? And yes, this is a fact. Something which belonged to us, we are looking for validation from outside. And which is where I am really, really banking on this team of 4 or 5 brilliant professors that I have, who in any case have a research background in the similar areas, that they will actually produce research, get it published, get it validated in-house. Because that's the way we accept things these days, till the time it is validated. So again, going back to the concentration part, if we have to learn it, so yesterday in that workshop, people were talking about it, how to do it, and whether they were Indians or they were from overseas, they all were talking somewhere that we have to learn to be in the moment. We have to learn to just focus on doing one thing at a time. And this is a practice. And how do you start a practice? Integrated with something which is most recurring in your life. To start with, it could be breath. Then it may even move to your kitchens, to your books, to your exercise, to your any day activity which you're doing, where you recognize that you do it far, far better by doing one thing at a time, being in the moment. And then, of course, there are multiple benefits. So something which belongs to us, something which we are legacy holder, something which is truly ours, let's first of all celebrate it in all its wholesomeness, and then produce some ways in which we can teach it to the mega stakeholders that we have, that is our students, industry, community, and while doing so, produce a body of knowledge which very proudly we can call our own, and ensure that something which was ours gets the due respect, recognition and validation which is much needed. And this conference is a very small step in that direction, wherein we have invited all the researchers from across the country and across the world to come and showcase all those baby steps or little steps they would have taken in validating scientifically the worth of it. We always knew it, but we need to wear it up our sleeves. We need to live it in our own lives and demonstrate that that is the way forward. And thank you so much to my young team for holding such a beautiful event. And this is just the beginning. I invite each one of you to be with us, join our hands, and try and help us in the small contribution which we are trying to make in this vast field called mindfulness. Thank you so much.
Thank you, ma'am. That was really motivating. Your guidance always leads us to a better path. Now, I request Director ma'am to unveil the first edited book titled Transforming Life Through Mindfulness from the selected papers. And she will be accompanied by Professor Nidhi Mishra and Professor Dinya Bharti, who have worked relentlessly to make this conference a success. a big congratulations to everyone. Now, I would like to welcome our very first keynote speaker, Professor Richard Badham, who is the Professor of the Project Leadership in the School of Project Management and the Director of the Executive Leadership in Major Projects program in the John Grill Institute of the University of Sydney. It is interesting to note that his academic research is focused on leading innovation and change with particular attention to power and politics, paradox and irony. Over the last 30 years, Richard has been an academic analyst engaged in research and consultant for numerous international corporations, agencies, and governments. Richard has brought his thought and experience to bear on the grand challenge mindfulness poses for individual and institutional thought and practice. In addition to a series of recent research overviews on the subject, Research addresses this issue in his forthcoming co-authored book with Bandra Santiago on the ironies of organizational change. Not taking much of his time, I would like to hand over the platform to Professor Richard, who is keen on speaking mindfulness in COVID and post-COVID world. Over to Professor.
Sir, you are on mute.
Fantastic. So it should be okay now?
Yes, sir.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Shashi, for such a gentle introduction. So I'll try and keep in the spirit. I also have to say thank you to Nidhi Mishra and all her team for actually all the help they've been giving. And Mr. Shashi is going to be turning over the slides. So I will say Shashi every now and then to say, could you please turn on to the next one? So I will begin. Fantastic. So the topic is mindfulness in the COVID and post-COVID era. And I rather like Shashi's term about we should stop beating ourselves over the head or beating other people over the head and have a little bit more of what I would term the lightness of being in regard to what many see as a threat, and it is a threat, but also how we can actually make this a life-affirming activity in the way in which we treat it. So Shashi, could we turn on to the first slide? So the grand challenge, Shakyamuni left the palace, but we spend most of our time trying to make the palace more comfortable, is what David Brazier once said. And I think it's very important that at a time when there's a lot of anxiety and threat created by COVID and the experience, that we do try to make people more comfortable. But at the same time, we use this as an opportunity for reflecting on deeper issues about ourselves and the community. And so it's about improving the palace rather than just making the palace a bit more comfortable. Could we go on to the next slide? Great, thank you. So first of all, mindfulness means many things to many people, but in a way it's more than what some people have referred to as a Buddha pill. Mindfulness goes far deeper than relieving anxiety and stress and using meditation-based methods, etc., to get there. That's important, it's a crucial part, but there are other dimensions as well. And one of these dimensions is being collective as well as individual. It's about how as institutions do we actually increase our response ability, as well as ourselves as individuals being able to adapt to threats and changes. And the final issue is that sometimes mindfulness is presented, particularly in the West, as being a kind of commercialized means of improving your health and well-being in a pursuit that can appear to be quite instrumental and quite commercial. Mindfulness is also about reflection on ethics, being engaged in social activities and political enterprise. So what I want to do is to cover those issues in the way in which they're raised by our responses to COVID. So could, Shashi, could we go on to the next slide? In order for me to continue, I'm saying apologies because I just need to throw a few concepts in mind to say what exactly do I mean by mindfulness. Now, for me, mindfulness is a state or quality of mind that attends to experience, but by giving full and proper attention to presence, context, and purpose. Now, that's big and it's complicated, but there are two big issues. What is it to pay full and proper attention to experience? One is to be aware of it, but we have to move beyond awareness to attend to it. And we have to move beyond attention to actually get ourselves in the bodily space and mental frame to actually accept what we notice with a degree of openness and non-judgment and compassion. And also in terms of experience, a lot of people take mindfulness to be reflecting on the here and now. But embedded in the here and now is actually some of the reasons why we pay attention to the here and now, which is that in terms of the Buddhist environment, is that on the one hand, we all experience incongruity in our lives. Dukkha means a kind of, not so much suffering, but an off-centered cartwheel was part of the origins. So we all want our lives to be perfect, but we have to come to terms with a life in which things are not perfect. Impermanence, it's another yearning. We try to fix things, but actually our experience is impermanent and fluid. We also like to isolate things and see causes and effects and solutions without understanding the context and the way in which what we're doing is interdependent with so many other things. And the final one is identification, is that despite the fact that we recognize this incongruity, impermanence, and interdependence, at the same time, we kind of yearn for fixity and for ourself and to live forever and for things to be right and correct, rather than living with this experience. So this is my general orientation for mindfulness. And what I'd now like to do is to just go into some illustrations and go into the COVID experience and how these bear on it. So can we go to the next slide? Fantastic. Now, the mindfulness and COVID are both very abstract concepts. I thought I'd just use a little bit of reflections that I was having about a river that runs through a property of mine in Australia. And sometimes the river is like on the left, a nice small little stream. And sometimes it's more like on the right, it's a tempestuous, stormy, large flowing river. And I find myself wanting the beauty of the river and what I like about the river to continue forever. And it's going through my property, so it's my river and I've got it under control. But when I stand back and take a mindful approach, I realize that the river that I kind of want to tidy up the edges and make it perfect is never going to be perfect. That what I like about the river and what I enjoyed yesterday is not going to be the river tomorrow. And how can I learn to live with that? And my experience of the river is dependent upon the state of the plateau that the water comes off that goes down into the river. It depends on my own state of being as well. And accepting the fact that I can enjoy the river and in a way go with the flow is part of the challenge. And I want to use those kind of personal reflections to now look at similar kinds of ideas in regard to the COVID experience. And if we could go on to the next slide. Now, COVID, some people said COVID is like a black swan, and a black swan is known for an unknown unknown. It's something that nobody could have predicted or expected beforehand. But after a while, it became quite apparent that COVID had been predicted by many, and the threats and challenges had actually been expected by a number of people. And there was a nice debate about it wasn't so much a black swan, but it was more like a grey rhino right in front of us, panting, pouring, threatening, but we tend to often ignore these grey rhinos. And what I want to do with COVID at the moment is that I want to shift us from a kind of a natural response which is COVID is a threat, everybody should be sorting it out, why haven't they done the right thing? Why didn't we expect it in the first place? Into what does COVID tell us about the way in which individuals and institutions respond to things? And how can we work with the way things are rather than our kind of yearning for things to be what ought to be? Can we go on to the next slide? So in terms of incongruity, a lot of people are saying, well, what were they thinking not preparing for COVID? Why was it that governments and institutions didn't actually prepare us for it? And once we go into the COVID experience, we see all the politics, we see the crises, we see the companies making money, we see the political furors, and we go, what's going on? Why don't they just ... solve the problem? And part of mindfulness is realizing the world is always like that. People are often not prepared. They don't respond in sensible ways. And what we need to be doing is to work with what we kind of know exists, but in many ways we wish didn't. Can we go on to the next slide? The next one is the impermanence. I don't know about you, but I keep on, at the beginning of this year, oh, maybe 2022 is not going to be like 2021. And in 2021, we thought it's going to be over. It's not going to be like 2020. There's a first wave, a second wave, a third wave, an Omicron virus, a son of Omicron. And we see wave after wave, but people are kind of trying to say, how do we solve it, right? How do we fix it? How do we make sure that we've got a vaccine? If we've got the vaccine, how do we make sure that the booster is going to do it? How do we bring out rules and regulations to make sure that this never happens again? And part of the lesson is that basically the fluidity of the process is something that we should expect. We're not going to fix it. We're not going to remove viruses. We're not going to remove dis-ease forever. We are looking at its various forms, and coming to terms with that is part of what I will argue later is a kind of lightness of being in treating COVID. Can we go on to the next slide? Interdependence. Now, an interesting thing is that when humanity was less developed technologically, we were dominated by threats from the environment. As the world's got more complex, more populated, more institutionalized, we're often dealing with what some people have called manufactured uncertainties. The creatures we've created, the institutions, the cultures, the organizations, the technologies, are themselves creating uncertainties and problems. And we now deal with the consequences of that. And the coronavirus in part is like that. And in our response to this uncertain world, our institutions are what some people have characterized as practicing organized irresponsibility. They're looking after their own goals in a fairly organized way, but they're not paying attention to the goals of other institutions. Nations go their own way, groups go their own way, cultures go their own way. But if we want to actually move to a broader perspective on something like COVID, we have to get beyond the organized irresponsibility and try and realize the interdependence and work with it. Can we go on to the next slide? Identification is that despite words of wisdom from anybody about the fact that expect incongruity, expect impermanence, expect interdependence, we kind of yearn for certainty. We yearn for the relief that the problem will get solved. And in a way, we have to recognize that yearning in ourselves and see what that feels like and what happens when we do that yearning and what's involved if we actually challenge that. And the idea that there's a happy ending, that if only we solve this problem, everything will be solved. And an English academic once said he'd lived his whole life expecting the stable state. If only I get the car, if only I get married, if only I get rid of the coronavirus, then everything's going to be okay. But learning to live in a world where that stability is not guaranteed is important. And now, with those reflections, I now want to go into different dimensions of mindfulness and COVID and just look at 4 questions that I'd like to have raised. I don't have solutions here, but I do have questions that I would like people to reflect on in opening up their consideration of how to respond to COVID. So could we go into the next slide? Right, so now this slide, I'm not expecting you to remember it. This is a quick talk and it's complicated. But when people discuss mindfulness, some people talk about individual experience. So mindfulness is of what we as individuals experience. Some people have extended it to say, actually, mindfulness should be extended to the collective level. What is it to be collectively mindful? And in addressing both individuals and collectivities, some people are concerned with mindfulness as a way of improving health and well-being. It's basically an instrument or a method to achieve what it is that we want for a basically happy life. Others are actually taking mindfulness to be something that opens up issues of why are we here? What purpose is there for the events that we're doing? Why do we practice mindfulness? What is the point of mindfulness? And that opens up all the ethical and political issues that surround COVID. So what I'm going to do now is look at questions from each of those different quadrants. And we'll begin with individual mindfulness. So if we go into the first slide, the next slide, please. So in individual mindfulness, what we're dealing with here is a lot of anxiety and stress has been created by COVID. And we want to calm ourselves and look after ourselves and make sure that we are able to cope with this. But we don't want leaping into reflex reactions that cause some people to stockpile toilet paper and do other ridiculous things. In responding to threats as an individual to COVID, it opens up this question that I'd like to say is, how do I create personal equanimity in my life? How do I step outside those stories that I'm telling myself, the voice inside my head, which is creating anxiety, is driven by my prejudices? And if I'm driven by those, I'm anxious and upset. How do I step outside when dealing with a threat such as COVID and step outside the anxiety-driven stories that tend to run around in our lives? So can we go on to the next slide? At a collective level, right, what we're concerned with COVID is how do we improve not just ourselves as individuals and our ability to respond to the threat, but how do we improve our organizations, our collective ability to anticipate and respond to threats in what is a complex, uncertain, and interdependent world? We know that ourselves, we often behave badly, our institutions often behave badly in the face of threats. So how do we actually make ourselves more mindful at a collective level so that our institutions are able to anticipate and respond to challenges more appropriately? And can we go on to the next slide? The next one is individual wisdom. And this is about when we respond to threats such as COVID, in a sense, it's not just COVID. It's about how do I respond to threats and challenges in my life? And given the fact that we all have pressures to conform to whatever is the existing conventional wisdom, the stories that make us feel guilty if we don't proceed in one particular way, how do I actually reflect on those pressures and stories that often come from institutions or political groups or whatever that push us in a certain direction? How do I reflect on those, stand outside them, and craft out my own ethical and political stance? So how do I want to respond to something such as COVID and the threats it imposes, not just in terms of managing the virus, but in terms of how I handle my life and determine what kind of person I want to be? And can we go on to the fourth slide, the next slide? Now, collective wisdom. This is a strange cartoon from Australia that's caused a lot of controversy. And I don't want to push this cartoon either against it or for it. I just want to use it to open up the fact that when responding to COVID and its threats, as a society, as a collectivity, how do we create a greater sense of collective purpose in responding to such things? What the cartoon did was it was from a person who was quite anti the government authoritarian regulation of vaccines. And so he was taking a stance about individual freedom and independence from government authority and intrusive control. Now, that's one of the stances on COVID. There are others about responsibility for looking after the community and how taking taking the vaccines and wearing masks, etc., are the ultimate in safety consideration and social responsibility. But how do we take those views, meld them together, and create more of a collective purpose? So after those 4 questions, can we go on to the next slide? Thank you. I want to end up with what I've been saying is that there are a lot of things that I've been mentioning, a lot of issues that we've been raised, and it could appear to be just too big. And what I want to argue actually is that addressing such questions can be nice and constructive. If we stick within our traditional mindset of, oh my God, my life should be perfect, COVID is a threat, what are we doing about it? We're messing it up. Isn't it terrible that we're messing it up? We end up getting stressed and upset. If we actually dig deeper into the principles of mindfulness, we can actually stand back and much more go with the flow and use it as an opportunity. So one principle for me is expect the expected. Expect there to be politics, incongruity, mess, impermanence, people behaving in ridiculous ways. A second theme is we need to approach this with the lightness of thought, heart, and touch. We adopt our perspective, but we're ready to move outside it. We follow through with our particular prejudices and feelings, but we're ready to stand out and see other people's point of view as well. We kind of want to know what the solutions are, but we need to see everything as an experiment that is in an uncertain environment, and we should step outside it. And the third principle is that we should be looking at these things at the individual level. What is it for me to be a lighter being in these areas? But also, what is it to open up our collectivities, our organizations to this degree of lightness? So returning back to the theme of Shashamuri and stepping, not making the palace more comfortable, but in a way stepping outside the palace, I would really like to emphasize we use mindfulness in all its different manifestations to open up a way of not just responding in a knee-jerk reaction to COVID, but using it to open up fundamental individual and collective issues that I think mindfulness has a lot to contribute to. So thank you very much for your attention. Bye.
I would like to request all of you, if you have any question for Professor Richard, please go ahead. You can write it in chat box if you have any question for Professor Richard.
Right. Anurag has said, how do we engage everyone to bring a collective mindset? I think I'm not going to leap into solutions, because as an academic, we never provide solutions. But in terms of a general approach, there's something about, particularly in the West, our individualistic culture makes us think that we can actually do things by ourselves. And the same things happened with institutions as well. We often in our institutions and organizations have an equal sense that we can solve our problems within our institution and organization. What something like COVID does is it begins to show that if we think as one institution or one country, we can't solve the problem. If we think of it just as ourselves as an individual, we can't solve the problem of our health and well-being and safety as an individual. So to use these issues to promote the fact that people should be thinking more collectively is, I think, one of the important ways to use COVID. And Vishnu said, thank you. How we should practice mindfulness in your workplace and the organization. I mean, I think that's very, very important. I think there are various different levels. I think mindfulness at one level, organizations have programs that help people to get more calm and relaxed. And I think they're very important. And with COVID, we do have a situation where people are anxious, upset, they're isolated, they're going back to work and they're scared. So to have programs that actually address the anxiety and the tension that people are dealing with is important. But I also think it needs to be done saying, as an organization, how did we respond to this threat? How well did we do? How do we as a collectivity respond to these kinds of things? And also to encourage people to think deeper inside themselves. You got worried and upset about COVID. But what does that mean? We're not going to live forever. What is it to actually get upset about COVID? How do we open up bigger issues around how we live our life inside our organizations and outside? And what kind of organizations do we want to create? So I've spent my time with a number of organizations in Australia trying to open up these broader issues for debate. And our organizations are often not too good in addressing these. So recognizing the barriers are going to be there is an important pragmatic recognition, I think. And Savita, I'm not quite sure in terms of our time. How many questions am I able to respond to?
I think we have the time for last question. One last question, please.
Okay, how do people who work with mindfulness not fall behind people who do multitasking at the workplaces? And I think it's funny, there's a slogan about we never have time to prepare properly for things, but we always have enough time to clear up the mess afterwards. Right? And there is a rather funny speed sign in New Zealand, which as you're going along, after the speed sign, it has afterwards, the faster you go, the bigger the mess. And I think there's something there about in the short term, you do fall behind if you're more reflective and more mindful. If you don't go for knee-jerk reactions and you see the complexity, you can appear to be prevaricating. But if you can hang it out, if you can create the space, the end result is you end up becoming more productive. You end up recognizing and appreciating issues that other people later on come to say, yes, I wish we'd listened to you at the beginning. So to try to keep your head, Rudyard Kipling in his poem If said, keep your head while everybody else is losing theirs. The key issue is to keep your head while everybody else is losing theirs, not get too frustrated and stick in there for the benefits that I think will come in the end. So thank you very much for listening, and thank you very much for the comments. I wish we had more time to look at more, but I probably run over more time now.
Thank you, Professor Richard. That was really perceptive, Professor Richard. Particularly your talk made us think about certain dimension, like collective mindfulness, that will make us think and ponder further. Thank you, everyone. Moving ahead, we have with us prominent Scott Shute, the head of mindfulness and compassion at LinkedIn, where Scott blends his lifelong practice and passion with his practical leadership and operation experience. Scott is at the intersection of the workplace and ancient wisdom traditions. He has been an active advocate for the customers and employees in the technology space for last 20 years, with roles ranging from sales, customer advocacy, and customer service leadership, to name a few. Previously, he was the Vice President of LinkedIn Customer Operation Organization. His mission is to change the work from inside out by mainstreaming mindfulness and operational compassion. What a beautiful blending. We would also like to congratulate him for his recent book, The Full Body Yes. More could be added, but honoring the time, I transfer the mic to Scott. Now, due to last-minute changes, he will not be able to attend us live, but we have a recorded lecture from him. And he will be talking on changing work from the inside out. Over to you, sir.
Hi, friends. It's good to be with you.
My name is Scott Shute, and I'm here to talk about changing work and our world from the inside out. But before we get started, first of all, I wish I was there with you. And we've all been in these places where we're not together. And so just for a moment, let's perhaps close our eyes and settle in and just be connected. You know, part of this practice is to be present. And it's a challenge for all of us. But I just invite you to be present and be with each other here for our time together. So thank you for indulging me. So in my most recent role, I was the head of mindfulness and compassion programs at LinkedIn. But how did that happen? How does something like that happen? Well, let me tell you my story. I have this part of my career where I've been an executive. I led global customer operations at LinkedIn. I had a team of over 1,000 people. Very complicated job. But I also had this other path where I had started a meditation practice when I was 13. It's been a huge part of my life. I started teaching when I was in college. And I found myself at LinkedIn 8 or 9 years ago. And it's such an open place. We talk about being your full and authentic self at work, about being your real self. And I wanted my inside of work person to be the same as my outside of work person. But I never really talked about my path or my spirituality or my practice at work. But it was time. And I met with my friend who leads our wellness programs at LinkedIn, and I asked him if we ever did anything with meditation. And he started to explain some things we had done, and he sees the look on my face. He's like, wait a minute, do you do something? I'm like, I could do something. And he got excited, and I got excited, because here was this VP who's going to lead a wellness program. Great. And I got really excited, and I went back to my desk, and I did absolutely nothing about it for 3 or 4 months. Because I was scared. I was terrified, really. And it was all the ego nonsense. You know, what are people going to think of me? What does this mean for my career? And I finally got out of my own way. That was the biggest hurdle, getting out of my own way. And I led a single practice on Thursday afternoon at 4:30 in the, get this, the heavenly conference room, which I thought was quite auspicious. And that first time, there was just one guy there. And I'm sure he was just as terrified as I was, because I never saw him again. But the next week, there were 3, and then there were 5, and then it became a regular thing. And then people knew I did it, so I'd get invited to do bigger events. The CFO would have a summit of finance people and invite me to kick it off with a meditation. And I raised my hand to be the executive sponsor of our mindfulness program at work. We didn't have one. So myself and a bunch of other volunteers created one. And then for me, the tipping point was 3 or 4 years ago. Our CEO at the time, Jeff Weiner, gave the commencement address at Wharton. And he talked about compassion. If you're going to be successful in life, if you're going to be successful in business, be compassionate. And I thought, oh, that's really interesting. And then the next 2 or 3 times he's on TV, this is all the reporters want to talk about, is compassion in business. They'd have 1 question about LinkedIn and 20 questions about compassion. I thought, it's time. It's time for me to invest in this, for my career to be this. I'd been doing my operations role for 6 years. It was time to do something new. But it was time for LinkedIn to invest in this. Because essentially, our CEO had just told 15,000 employees that compassion was the most important thing that they could do. What does that even mean? And so I made a pitch to Jeff and our head of HR, and collectively we created this role, head of mindfulness and compassion programs, where my mission and vision is to change work from the inside out by mainstreaming mindfulness and operationalizing compassion. What does that mean? Well, it's good fun. On the mindfulness side, really, this is the development of self, right? And we did lots of interesting things. Everything from, we gave everybody free access to this app called Wise at Work from our friends at Wisdom Labs. And every year we would have a 30-day challenge and try to get the whole company to use the app. And if you use the app for 20 times during this month, you'd get a t-shirt or a hoodie. And what I can say is never underestimate the power of a free hoodie on people's behavior. But we also had weekly meditation sessions. In fact, before the pandemic, 40 to 60 weekly meditation sessions for a company of 15,000 or so. We'd have these drop-in community sessions that went beyond meditation. We had a speaker series. We had weekend and Friday afternoon retreats. We tried to offer something for everyone in the phase of their journey. But why? Why would a company like LinkedIn, or any company, invest in mindfulness? Well, to answer that question, let's talk about the history of work, really briefly. In the really old days, and for some people not that far ago, the agrarian age, right? If you think about building the pyramids 5,000 years ago, there were kings and slaves, or landowners and serfs. And then we graduated into the industrial age. Imagine all of us working in a factory building the same thing. And in neither of those cases were workers treated particularly well or highly valued. But today, in the information age, it looks a lot like this. We're at home, or we're doing our lives and work at the same time. And a company like LinkedIn or many others, we don't have hard assets. We're not selling cars or computers. We're selling data. Which means that by far, the number one asset in the company is people. Because people is what create the products and the services that we offer. So of course it makes sense for a business to invest in its most important asset. And you all probably know, but our state of the union in our mental wellness is not great. The CDC will tell us that on any given week, in America at least, about 1/3 of Americans are suffering from anxiety or depression. In a workplace survey, hundreds of employees over 17 different industries found that 83% were feeling emotionally drained. And for me, the most disturbing, the CDC tells us that 11%, which is 1 in 9 of Americans in the last 30 days, seriously considered taking their own life. It's pretty alarming. Just think about it. In your next staff meeting or in the place you're at, look around. 1 in 9? Most of us will never know which one. But the truth is, this time has been very hard for all of us. And it's a time, in some ways, that has been a gift. Hang with me for a second. For some, maybe not a gift mentally or emotionally or even physically, but deeper. Whatever you want to call that. Spiritually, perhaps. Because more and more people have been forced to go within. I believe that life never gives us more than we can handle, but sometimes, perhaps often, it gives us more than we can handle with our current recipe. And so the number of people meditating, the number of people going within and looking for something deeper has gone up dramatically. So the usage of meditation apps, the usage of meditation itself has increased greatly in the last few years, but also the last decade. And back to work, employees are asking for more. Employees are asking for more help with their mental wellness from their companies. But still, there's some people who say, all right, well, fine. Well, what's the ROI on this stuff? And I'm a business guy at heart, so I want to know what the ROI is. And, in these days, I manage things like, or I measure ROI by consumption. If we create a product, if we create something, do people come? But also customer satisfaction. Do they like it? But if we go further than that, I think that over time, look, there's already over 6,000 scientifically reviewed papers that show meditation is good for reducing stress, reducing anxiety, increasing the quality of our sleep, increasing our relationships, the quality of our relationships. We all know these well. And I do think in the future that we will find that meditation also increases our productivity and our ability to be balanced and stable. But for the moment, what I really love is the stories. And one young woman came up to me in the hallway a few years ago, and she was encouraged to tell her story by one of my friends. And she said, all right, look, you know, I used to think this whole mindfulness stuff was just a bunch of BS, a bunch of nonsense. She said it in a more colorful way. But she says, you know, last year you guys put on this challenge, this 30-day challenge, and I love a good challenge, so I tried it. And I meditated every day for 30 days. And now I'm on day 400 of my streak using the app. And I said, that's amazing, nice job. She's like, no, that's not even the good part. She said, this morning, I stood on stage. I gave a presentation at my all hands, which for her was about 80 people. I gave a presentation with all these people. I said, that's great. She's like, no, you don't understand. A year ago, 400 days ago, I never would have done that. I never would have signed up to present. That's not who I am. I would have thought probably my brain is going to explode if that happens. And even this morning, I was kind of freaking out. But I went to a conference room, and I did my breathing, and I relaxed, and I went out there and I crushed it. And she was beaming. And I thought to myself, okay, this is why we do this work. Her career trajectory had changed. The trajectory of her life had changed. It was very meaningful in all aspects of who she was. Mark Bernalini, who was the CEO at Aetna, perhaps got it right. He said, look, if we save one life, who cares about the money? And well, maybe he said it in a more colorful way as well. If we save one life, if we shape one life, if we improve the lives of our employees, of course, the company is going to be better off. But still, there's an evolution. There are still naysayers. A number of years ago, I was at my mom's. I grew up in Kansas, which is in the middle of America, a very rural area. And we were looking for something to do, so we went to an antique store. And in this antique store, they had this pile of Time and Life magazines. And in that moment, a couple years ago, I was about to turn 50. And I wanted to buy some magazines from 1969, from my birth year, to see what life was like when I came into this world. And some things haven't changed. In fact, this one is a real one. The cover says, "Is Prince Charles necessary?" Which I think in 2022 there are still covers, unfortunately for Prince Charles, that say the same thing. But some things have changed a lot. In this same magazine, there were articles about race and about gender that would make us cringe today. There were advertisements for sugar, you know, the natural energy. And even advertisements for nicotine, with a medical doctor in a white lab coat pitching how great nicotine was for that afternoon boost of energy. So things have changed. And in this magazine from 1969 is an article about a Midwestern swim team. They'd won a couple championships, and the reporter, a man always during that time, went to go see what was going on. And in giant font, the headline read, "Athletes subject themselves to self-torture in order to win." I was thinking, what has happened? Self-torture? What are they doing? Is it electroshock therapy or waterboarding? They were swimmers. I don't know. Do you know what they were doing in 1969 that was so very strange? They were lifting weights. They were doing strength training. And in this moment, they were an early adopter for strength training. And they were winning. Their organization was trying something new, and it was working. And this is kind of where we are with meditation, with mindfulness inside of companies. Right? There are early adopters. Us here in this room, early adopters. But there are still people who are not quite sure about it. But I don't think it will take us 50 years to make the transition, because in physical exercise, think about how far we've come. In the 70s and 80s, Nike came along and the advent of running. Before that, it was very strange. Look, our grandparents didn't exercise. Our great-grandparents didn't exercise. They didn't hop on an exercise bike or a Peloton No, they worked hard. It's only in the last 50 years that physical exercise for fun and fitness has become a thing. Just like for thousands of years, some people have been meditating. But today, it's time to bring that into the workplace. It will make all of us better, right? And I don't think it'll take 50 years. I would guess in the next 15 or 20 years that every company worth its salt has a head of mindfulness programs as part of their wellness group. Okay, so maybe you're sold, maybe you're a leader at a company. If you're a leader, what can we do? How can we get started? I think there's a few ways. The first one is to find your volunteers. I guarantee you, if you're an organization of any size, there are people inside your organization who would love to help, who would love to bring their practice to work. They just need some guidelines and some assistance and some push to get over that hump. The second part is perhaps find a partner. If you're unsure of what to offer, there are lots of vendors now who can help. People like Wisdom Labs and Potential Project. And then leverage your existing programs. You probably already have wellness programs. At LinkedIn, we had wellness programs and things like 30-day sleep challenges or hydration challenges. So it wasn't that strange to add a 30-day meditation challenge. But basically, just get started. Support something. Get it rolling. And as individuals, maybe you're an individual wondering how you can bring this to your environment, just get started. Just do something. You don't have to wait until the job is presented to you. I volunteered for 4 years before turning it into a full-time thing. Just start. Thursday afternoon, 4:30, find your conference room. And then what happens is you'll find out who else is interested. Your friends will come. Other people interested in this topic will come out of the woodwork. And then the third part is to find a champion. Whoever is the most senior person in your organization that is supportive of mindfulness, have a conversation with them and see if they would be interested in helping. So that's mindfulness. And look, in this world where there's so much chaos and division, and work for thousands of years has been playing a part in creating some of that stress on us, I believe that work can actually be part of the solution that helps us heal. Work can be part of the solution that helps us with our mental well-being. And mindfulness is one piece of that. Okay, I mentioned I had 2 parts of my role. And now I've left LinkedIn, I'm out in the world, I wrote a book, I'm doing speaking and consulting, but my mission is still the same. Change work from the inside out by mainstreaming mindfulness and operationalizing compassion. All right, well, if mindfulness is the development of self, where does compassion fit into business? Good question. Well, let's start with the definition. And here's my definition. There's lots of good definitions in the world, but I talk about compassion as having the capacity, because our capacity ebbs and flows moment to moment. Capacity for 3 things. The capacity to have an awareness of others, a mindset of wishing the best for them, and then the courage to take action. Awareness of others, a mindset of kindness or wishing the best for them, and then the courage to take action. And we find that when applied to business, this is actually a competitive advantage. Of course, you should just do it because it's the right thing to do, but it's also a great way to build a business, a great way to build a career. So what does that mean? Well, let's talk about it in a few ways. For individuals, some of you are familiar with Adam Grant's work, Give and Take. Adam Grant is a Wharton professor. And basically, he divides the world's workers into this spectrum. Every place from selfless givers all the way to takers. And he discovers that takers do better than selfless givers in the world of work, which is a bummer if, you're into humanity. But he goes on to find another class of workers that do better than anyone else. And he calls these people otherish, like the opposite of selfish. In other words, people who are moved from just solving for me and are solving for the we are the most successful. And I believe that compassion is at the root of that. So as an individual, this is a success strategy. For teams, Google did this project called Project Aristotle a number of years ago. And they were looking for what are the factors that make up a high-performing team. And I'm not sure what they thought that they would find, but here's what it's not. The number one factor is not how smart you are, your level of IQ, what school you went to, what your GPA was, what your degree was in, or even the level of diversity. The number one factor in building a high-performing team is psychological safety. In other words, can I be myself in front of you? Can I fail in front of you and know that you have my back? Or perhaps even harder, can I win in front of you? Can I succeed in front of you and know that you'll have my back? I don't know if you've ever had this experience, but let's say we're on a sales team and my friend is already at 220% of quota and I'm at 82% of quota with 2 weeks to go in the quarter. Am I going to help him? Am I going to feel compassion towards him? Human nature is very tricky. So, the number one factor in building a high-performing team, psychological safety, which is rooted in compassion. And finally, at the company level, the work that Raj Sisodia and team did on firms of endearment is pretty genius. They also wrote Conscious Capitalism after that. And they found that companies who take care of all of their stakeholders, not just their shareholders, are more profitable. In other words, if they create long-term value for their customers, they create a great place to work for their employees, and they have a good business model, these companies are 14 times more profitable. That's 1,400% more profitable than the S&P average. So compassion, this moving from me to we, is how we build a great organization. And it's how we make the world a better place. Okay? Well, what does it mean? What does it mean to operationalize? I'm going to give you 3 examples. The first one could be in sales. A head of sales could stand in front of 4,000 people at sales kickoff and say, look, our job as salespeople is to provide long-term value. So don't sell something our customers don't need at the end of the quarter just so you can hit your quota. That ethos has compassion at the roots. Right? We go back to what is compassion? It's awareness of the other person, a mindset of kindness, the courage to take action. It's usually the courage to take action that gets hard. Because in this case, we could sell something at the end of the quarter to satisfy our shareholders. But what we know is over the long term, that's not good for our business. And you know this to be true in your own relationships. Think about your primary relationship. If you're married or the person you're closest to. If we insist on getting what we want 100% of the time, probably we are not going to be very happy because we might not be in that relationship for very long. And so we learn that in order for me to be happy, I solve for we. In other words, in this relationship, it's a balance. I solve that about half the time I get what I want, and about half the time my partner gets what she wants. And that's the way to make both of us happy. It turns out, of course, it's common sense, but also this is how companies win as well. But our management practices have gone back to the agrarian age and the industrial age of whatever rules we had in place at that moment. All right, so that's an example from sales. What about product? Okay, a company like LinkedIn, a product manager comes to the product executive team with the latest version of their product, And they say, okay, with what I'm doing, we're going to get 22% more clicks, 22% more engagement. And the first question should be, oh, okay, that's good. What's the member experience like? What's the customer experience like? And if the answer is, well, it's not great. Hey, did I mention it's 22% more engagement? Our job as a leader is to stop this meeting, and then the meeting becomes more of a discussion about our number one value, which at LinkedIn is members first. Because we know that if our members are happy, then we have a business to build on. And if they are not happy, then we have no business. Just like in our relationships. Compassion at its roots. And then the third one, in my previous job, I led customer service, and I was visiting a team in a different city, and I was walking the halls, and I saw this young customer service representative. She had a sticky note on her monitor that said grandma. And, we were just kind of chatting about it. I asked her what the note meant, and she says, yeah, this job can be really hard. Every day I'm dealing with 40 or 50 or sometimes 80 customers. And they're usually not calling to tell me that they love me, right? It's usually some sort of problem. And I can get a little bit jaded, and by the end of the day, I can just, unfortunately, start treating them like a number. And I don't want to do that. And so what I do is, before I get on the next call, before I get on the next text or chat, I look at this little message that says grandma, and I visualize my grandma on the other end of this call. Because if my grandma was calling or chatting in, I would treat her like she was a queen. Because I love my grandma. There's nothing I wouldn't do for my grandma. And that's how I want to treat the next customer. And she was great at her job, by the way. So compassion is at the root of these things. So at a high level, these concepts are not complicated. They're actually pretty easy. Easy to understand, sometimes challenging to put into practice. And the consciousness of the organization really just mirrors the consciousness of the individuals. And these why these two things, mindfulness and compassion, are connected. Because as we develop as individuals, as we rise our consciousness, the consciousness of our company rises as well. And if we all put these into practice, just a little bit of mindfulness, a little bit of compassion, and maybe a lot over time, I think together we can change the world. We can change our work. We can change our lives from the inside out. So thank you for listening to me, and I hope that you stay in touch. I'm sure you can find me on the internet. You know where to find me. And have a beautiful rest of your day. And go out there and be an ambassador for compassion, because the world needs you. Thanks very much. Take care.
Thank you, Mr. Scott, for this very beautiful talk, and thank you for reminding us to be compassionate. And also, I think we can't agree more that yes, incentive works. T-shirt, hoodie, yes, definitely works. Now we have with us Mr. Rick Fernandez. He is the CEO at the Search Inside Yourself Leadership Institute for the last 5 years. It's notable that he is also co-founder at the Wisdom Labs, Wiser Workplace for a Better World, which is based in San Francisco, California, and works on the issues related to health, wellness, and fitness. In the past decade, he has also worked in corporations like Google, eBay, and JP Morgan. He has done his PhD in counseling psychology from Columbia University in the city of New York, and also has a BA in literature from UC San Diego. Not extended it a lot, I welcome Mr. Rich Fernandez to take the session ahead with his keen interest on mindfulness and technology, the path forward.
Thank you so much. It's lovely to be here. And first I want to congratulate the team there at IIM Bodh Gaya and the Center for Mindfulness, Samadvan, for this inaugural event. Thank you so much for convening us and hosting us, because these are very important topics that I hope will continue to spread in the world. So I'm here to talk a little bit today about mindfulness and technology. And I have a presentation I'll share with you. And I'll speak for part of the time, but I also want to make space to be able to answer questions for everybody. So I will share my screen now so that I can share this presentation, which you can see here, I believe. Is that correct? Okay. So our friends there at IIM Bodh Gaya asked me to speak on this topic of mindfulness and technology and the path forward. Before I do that, I want to say that I did spend a number of years working in technology companies. So I worked at eBay, and then after that, I worked at Google for a few years. And that is where we developed this program of mindfulness, neuroscience, and emotional intelligence called Search Inside Yourself. So the idea, it's a funny name because it's like Google search, but search inside yourself. And in order to be able to teach mindfulness at a place like Google, which was very data-driven, very scientific, empirically minded people, we had to always connect it to both neuroscience, so understanding of the brain and its role in mindfulness, and then also the outcome of growing intelligence, and in this case, a specific type of intelligence, which is emotional intelligence. So when I was at Google, this curriculum was just being built, and I was one of the early teachers of the curriculum. And it became very, very popular inside of Google because at some point, the engineers inside of Google realized they actually had to work with other humans. And they had not realized that that was part of the job description. So they needed skills. And the key thing that the neuroscience tells us is that you can, through the capacity for neuroplasticity, you can change your brain. You can rewire your brain. And so we used that research to link it to the practices of mindfulness. And it was really very popular with the engineers at Google and the employees there. And then eventually we launched a separate institute, which exists today as the Search Inside Yourself Leadership Institute. And we work in 60 countries around the world. So I'm happy to say I've been to India a few times, and I was at a mindfulness summit there before COVID. And it's wonderful to be able to speak about these topics in the place where so many of these practices originated. So before I go further, I actually would like to invite a little bit of an interactive piece here. And I am speaking on the topic of mindfulness and technology, but before I share any perspectives on that, I would like to ask you actually for your perspective. So how would you describe the relationship between mindfulness and technology from your own experience? How might you describe that? And if you could just chat in maybe 1 to 3 words, what your perception of this experience between mindfulness and technology might be, it would be great to see. So I'm opening the chat here, and I am actually trying to be able to see here what is saying in the chat. I can't seem to see the chat, so might someone read that for me on the panel there? One moment. Sometimes technology isn't as cooperative as I would like. Okay, I can't quite see what the chat is saying, so I am going to just proceed then. Unfortunately, I can't seem to access the chat. Okay. Okay. Here we are. Okay. Technology not required to be mindful. Okay, now I found it. Yes. I love that comment. Technology is not required to be mindful. It is an innate capacity that we all have as humans. I think that is true. It can promote work-life balance, I believe. If used constructively, technology can enhance mindfulness. From Dr. Monica, yes, I agree with that, and I will present some suggestions on that. Training the mind to accept technology, yes. These are disruptive yet complementary. Thank you, Poonam Sethi, for that. That's a very interesting comment. It can be very complementary technology. It can also be very disruptive and counter to mindfulness. It really depends on how we use it, yeah? So I want to explore that idea of how we use technology as a tool. So I think I want to give the answer, if I might share the answer here in the beginning to this question, mindfulness and technology, what is the path forward? And from my perspective, I'd like to say that the path forward is really inward. I believe that the path forward is inward. In other words, the technology can be useful to do what mindfulness is designed for, which is to allow us to look deeply within ourselves, to search within ourselves. As one of you commented, it is not necessary to have technology, but technology is also part of our lives. So whether you're using technology to practice mindfulness or you're simply experiencing technology in your life, there is a place for mindfulness to be able to cultivate the skill to work effectively with the technology that presents itself in your life. And why is that an important thing to do? It's because, as many of you have heard this term, the world is volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. We don't have to look very far to be able to see that with the pandemic and everything that's happening in the world today. In many ways, the world has been a VUCA, or volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous world for decades now, but it only seems to be accelerating. And we as people tend to experience this in a way that creates a sense of what I would call hyperconnectivity, this constantly being connected to our devices and our technology. I think I read a statistic the other day that 8 billion people have, there are 8 billion smartphones in the world, which conforms roughly to most of the population of Earth. So everybody is connected in a certain way through technology. But there is both a simplification that can happen. We can do far more, but it also creates much more complexity, velocity, and volume. The volume of work that I do compared to the volume of work I did a decade or 2 or 3 decades ago is so much higher. And one result is stress and burnout. And in fact, we know that we often can experience it this way. Our brains are kind of scrambled, yeah? So our mind is all tangled up, and it's difficult, as they say, to distinguish the signal from the noise. The other thing that is happening as we think about the growth of technology is this transition from different types of economies. Now, the reality is in most countries in the world, my country here in the United States, your country in India, or wherever you're dialing in from, there are industrial sectors, very large industrial sectors. So there is still an industrial economy, but there is also a knowledge economy, folks who mostly work with their minds and who use technology, in this picture in finance or in high technology itself. And then there's also the innovation economy, what's been called the innovation economy, where technology takes new forms and unexpected forms and actually starts to shape different ways that we have to interact and work. In other words, it requires us to be adaptable. This is a picture of a robotic attendant in a hospital here in the United States. And this robot is designed to accompany patients in the room so that they don't get lonely. And research suggests that having a robot that's sort of pre-programmed to be friendly and to listen to you and to give you even pre-recorded responses makes people feel better. So I don't know if that's mindful or compassionate or not, but certainly it requires adaptability. We also know from places like the World Economic Forum that the types of skills that are going to be required in this new world, in the new economy, in the world of work in particular, from their report on the future of work, they suggest, of course, that we'll need some technical skills. About half of the skills you see on this list, these top 10 skills for the future of work, are technical in nature: analytical thinking, systems analysis and evaluation, technology design and programming. But look at the other ones. Those are very human-based skills: active learning, creativity and originality, critical thinking, problem solving, leadership and social influence. Emotional intelligence is the 8th most important skill for the future of work, according to the World Economic Forum. And so I would like to offer here that the skills of mindfulness, which include and extend to empathy and compassion, are actually more important than ever. They are part of the future of work. They have been around for aeons, and they will continue to be, and they're really important for the future. And as you can see in this great article from Harvard Business Review, there is a sense that actually mindfulness helps you become a better leader. So we'll talk about that a little bit, and I think some of the other speakers will be talking about that. But I want to suggest that there's really 4 key things to think about in terms of mindfulness and its relationship to technology. So the very first thing I'd say about all of this is that I believe, as I was just stating, and as you saw in the World Economic Forum report, human-centered skills are needed more than ever as technology becomes more, ever more, and never less prominent in our work and life. Because how many of you can actually say that you're having less technology in your life? Can anyone of you say that? I would be curious. Anyone have less technology in their life? Most everybody would probably say there's more technology. There are more apps. There are more things to use, right? Web3 is coming. The metaverse is coming, or is actually those things are already here. So there's more and more technology that we need to be, that are kind of pulling our attention. Whether we choose to use them or not is different, but they're certainly there and they are designed to capture our attention. And so mindfulness in many ways can become like a medicine, where it can address 4 key areas that go from the individual all the way through the organizational to the societal, as you see here. So I want to suggest that it's these 4 things. Mindfulness can be very valuable in an increasingly technological world to address stress and burnout, number 1, to create connection in a world where we often feel disconnected, to deliver on a new leadership mandate. Scott, the speaker before me, was speaking to some of this. The new leadership mandate is that leaders are expected to be empathic and compassionate as a skill set. The younger generation expects that, actually. And then finally, I want to sort of end the talk today just by touching on this idea that there are some reinvention of mindfulness practice using technology, some of which can be very helpful. And so I call that ancient practices, new form factors. So I think those are the ways that mindfulness kind of leads us through this current age we're in of technological pervasiveness. But let me go to number 1 first. How does it address stress and burnout? I won't spend much time on this, but we know that with the current way we live and work, burnout has become an epidemic. And the World Health Organization actually offers it as a now medical diagnosis. We also know the impact of that in organizations. And, you know, I spent many years in organizations, and we work with large organizations even today. So a lot of what I'm sharing with you here has to do with organizations, but it's also true for life outside of organizations. But look at the statistic on the right. I think that 2.6 times, the bottom one on the right, of young people, of employees who experience burnout are 2.5 times likely to be seeking a different job. So there's a very real cost to organizations when we can't take care of people and when we overwhelm them. The other thing is that the younger generation who take time away from work because they're stressed and burnt out, will often not admit it. Over 40% of them won't tell anyone. They won't tell their employers. And so it's even more urgent because it's easy to lose the young talent. Yet we know that mindfulness at work and things like meditation can also help ease anxiety and mental stress. And I think my colleague Scott, who spoke before me, who I know personally and who I've worked with actually, and he was talking about the Wisdom Labs app, and that is a company I co-founded. They use that at LinkedIn, and it does help those who use it manage some of these stresses and anxieties. We do know that employees who practice mindfulness do report greater resilience, well-being, have better immune responses, get sick less, in other words, and have greater job satisfaction. So there's a lot of reasons to do it. And then from our own experience, we've run mindfulness programs. One of our largest clients is SAP, the multinational Germany-based software company. And when we run mindfulness programming there, we've trained now 13,000 of their employees. Here from the Search Inside Yourself Leadership Institute, we have trained 13,000 of SAP's employees. And here's a sampling of some of the impacts we see. When they practice mindfulness skills, they increase well-being and meaning and engagement and focus, decrease stress, and increase creativity, relationship quality, communication, and collaboration. Not only 4 weeks or immediately after the practice programs, but even 6 months after the course. Those who continued to practice saw sustained improvement. So mindfulness practices in many ways are a sustained source of well-being, resilience, focus, creativity, all the things you see here. This is actually a case study from a real life organization, and they did this study, not us, but they are a client. When we collect data, we have over 10,000 points of data now because we've trained over 225,000 people around the world. We see that by training them on these mindfulness tools, we see a double-digit increase from 46% pre-program to 71% post-program in the use of mindfulness as a technique to manage stress. So again, there's real data behind this idea that these are very beneficial. And I just wanted to offer one very, very brief, what we like to call micro practice, which is what we call the 3-breath practice. And we invite people in our programs to do these 3 breaths. And so the first breath, collect and gather your attention as you exhale. The next breath, breathing in. And then as you exhale, relaxing your body. One small measure, whatever that means for you. And then on the 3rd breath, breathing in. And simply reflecting what's most important right now in this moment. So we like to share this practice because it only takes 30 seconds or 3 breaths. And this is something that busy people in the workplace can do. But it's an example of how mindfulness can improve upon stress and promote calm. The second thing is it increases connection. In a disconnected world, this one study suggests that 61% of workers report feeling lonely. That we also know from our own studies of several thousand organizations that we did recently, that the number one skill that matters for team success is about connecting. It's the skill of collaboration, followed by communication and productivity and adaptability. So 3 of these 5 skills are interpersonal skills, requiring the ability to connect, to have empathy. Companies that prioritize collaboration are 2 times as likely to be profitable. You can see here. And then at Google, one of the studies we found was that the most effective teams had empathy within the team culture. It was a norm. They could take risks, they could fail, and they could feel safe that they could learn from the experience, get support from their team or managers or leaders, and then try again. That's very important when you're trying to solve difficult problems and have aggressive goals and you fail. It has to be okay to fail. But the only way you can do that is with empathy. And so the number one quality of an effective team at Google was, in fact, psychological safety. They felt comfortable to take risks and be vulnerable in front of each other, even in the face of failure. Satya Nadella, who is the CEO of Microsoft, talks about inclusive teams that value different perspectives, inclusive design principles, but it all hinges on empathy. It's not possible to get the best from your team without empathy. Very often, older models of leadership, older models of organizational culture are very hierarchical, command and control. You're either right or you're wrong, and that's it, right? That is an old model that isn't really relevant or useful for information age, and I would even say innovation age organizations. And we know that you can train empathy as a skill. Again, this is our own data. Pre-post, when we train people on empathy, you can see double-digit increases. And again, another micro practice is, I wish for you to be well, sending thoughts of kindness and goodwill, simply considering a person in front of you and wishing them well. I know there's only a few minutes left, so I'm just going to speak for maybe a couple more minutes, and then maybe we can have some questions. But there is increasingly a new leadership mandate. We know even as technology grows, for example, as artificial intelligence and automation increase, the need for mindfulness-based emotional intelligence grows, according to leaders in the Capgemini survey you see here. It was a very large sample set, and 74% of executives in all different countries. And you can see India is actually 95% of executives surveyed in India believe that this is the case, that mindfulness-based emotional intelligence skills are going to be increasingly important with artificial intelligence and automation, because the routine tasks will be taken over by machines, and that leaves people to work with each other. So they must have the skills to work with each other, and also to work with complicated issues that come up with AI and automation. It's a fascinating study. So you can look at the Capgemini 2019 report for that. We know from the Journal of Management, leaders who draw on mindfulness enhance the ability to interact with others, maintain perspective, attune to other emotional states. And from the Harvard Business Review article, mindfulness basically promotes clarity, deeper understanding, passion for your work, and compassion for others. Beautiful quote here by Bill George. It's a super skill that brings out the best in people. So there is an intrapersonal element of mindfulness within yourself, and then the interpersonal aspect of it, which is particularly useful, for example, in the workplace. So one thing I will just end with is the fourth point, which is in many ways the effect of technology on mindfulness is that it in some ways is a reinvention of a very ancient practice, right? These are ancient practices. These are not new. They've been around for aeons. Like I said, many of them originated in India, in Bodh Gaya and other places. However, we have new form factors, the reinvention of new mindfulness technologies. And you can see here just a very brief sampling, for example, of the different types of technologies for which mindfulness is at the core. You have meditation apps, many of which you'll be familiar with, whether it be Headspace or Calm. You have the Aura Ring, which measures your meditation galvanically, skin conduction on your ring. Simple Habit, Wellness Coach, in terms of mindfulness and being able to become aware of emotion. You have things like Emotive, which is a headset device that tracks your kind of emotional states and helps you become aware of them. The spiritual and personal development quadrant is largely learning platforms like Sounds True, the Shift Network, Mind Valley, Wanderlust. You're aware of some of these. These are all learning or edtech organizations and platforms that allow for deepening of spiritual and personal wellness. And then meditation and mindfulness devices. These are in many cases wearables, whether if you look at the right-hand side, the Muse, which is a headband measuring your EEG signals as you meditate and putting them down onto graphical user interface that's gamified so you can Notice when your attention has wandered by noticing your biofeedback signals from your brain, or Trip. I don't know if some of you have seen Trip or Relax VR. It's a virtual reality headset on the Oculus Rift, and it creates meditative environments in virtual reality. Some of these have had peer-reviewed research done on them, and what they have found is that they do facilitate meditative states. So, as somebody was saying earlier, they can be disruptive and useful. They're not the only solution, but it's interesting to note that they have huge adoption, especially amongst the younger generation. My son, has tried some of these things, and he likes them better than sitting and trying to meditate, in the traditional way. That's not to say it's better, but it's important to consider that technology is presenting a new form factor for mindfulness, a new expression of mindfulness, and a new opportunity for practice. It also takes us away from mindfulness sometimes. So it's really how we use it. So it's like what I said before. So I'm ending where I began, which is the path forward, mindfulness and technology, is inward. For us to search inside yourself and think for ourselves how best we might want to use these tools. So with that, I will stop the presentation and then just see if anyone should have any questions or comments. Please just type them into the chat bar. We have a couple more minutes, I think.
Thank you, Mr. Fernandez, for the wonderful talk. Standing is in this juncture of time, we should rethink and relook with our interaction with the technology to get a better level of understanding of the concept of mindfulness. So here we can take 1 or 2 quick questions. If you have any question, please write it in the chat box.
Well, thank you for your kind words, everybody. I appreciate that might have been helpful. And I'm surprised nobody, I thought I perhaps said some provocative things about technology. I wonder if anyone.
Okay, Mr. Fernandez, we have a question. The question is, how mindfulness increases emotional intelligence?
Yeah, well, so simply I would say that emotional intelligence can be a very direct output or result of mindfulness. Mindfulness is in many ways a way to grow awareness, right, of oneself, of others, of the environment. And emotional intelligence is about self and other awareness. And so mindfulness is really the practice that builds the skill of emotional intelligence.
Okay, and I think we can take one more and the last question for the session. How can we use technology to improve human skills?
Well, all I would say about that is if, like a technology like the very one we're on now, it allows us greater connectivity as opposed to isolation, then it can improve skills. And I'll tell you very quickly, my son is 15 years old and he loves video games. And for a long time, my wife and I were trying to understand whether or not we should limit him, because we felt like we thought he might be isolating himself in his room playing his video games, until we found out he was playing with all his best friends and friends he had not seen for many years who lived in many cities across the country. It was actually a way he connected. And so I think we just have to ask ourselves again, search inside ourselves and ask ourselves, it'll improve human skills if it allows us to connect more deeply and effectively and easily with ourselves and with others.
Thank you, everyone. So we would move forward, and more of this is getting interesting. After aligning and managing all, the pandemic taught us a very important lesson, that however and whatever we have. Self-care is an eternal need. With this note, we have with us Ms. Lynn C. Wilde. Lynn is associated with Stanford University School of Medicine in Santiago, California, for the last 2 decades. And also, she is a full-time professor at the Palo Alto University. Lynn has completed her PhD and MA in clinical psychology from the University of Colorado Boulder. Without taking more of hers and your time, I invite Lynn to take charge and tell us more about mindfulness and meditation for self-care and self-development. Welcome, Lynn.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I want to share my screen with you now. So we can begin. I want to thank you first for inviting me, and just congratulate you on this wonderful first international research conference. I am sure that it will do much to raise the level and illuminate practice in many different areas. I'm especially grateful to Dr. Sahai, Dr. Mishra, and Dr. Bharti for inviting me, and I'm so thrilled to hear about the great work of Samatvam. So thank you so much for inviting me, and congratulations. Today I come to talk about what is mindfulness. It's a term that we use a lot. What do we mean when we say that? And how can we actually use mindfulness for self-care and self-development? And in order to talk about that, we'll be talking about it from a developmental perspective. How do we, rather than saying mindfulness is one thing, how do we get there? Where do we put our first step on the pathway? And as I talk, I'm mindful of Dr. Sahai's questions that she raised in her opening address about how do we concentrate? How do we focus? How do we learn and practice? How do we make room in our lives for mindfulness practice? It's been a central concern of mine over the last 20 years as a professor and as a clinician. I'm a clinical psychologist, and as a researcher. And so I bring my perspective from having run a mindfulness clinic for 15 years in Palo Alto, and along with my staff and clinical trainees, where we taught thousands of people in the San Francisco Bay Area and throughout the world, but also in empirically testing our inner resources for stress intervention in a series of clinical trials. And you can see that we've done this work in different countries in a lot of different settings. And again, I make the observation that mindfulness seems to have a very broad appeal and seems to be useful and acceptable and helpful for people from all walks of life. And so my central concern in all this is that if we might talk about mindfulness with people and we might try to teach them to do mindfulness, but if they don't somehow use the practice and incorporate it, then nothing is gained from our efforts. So my central concerns are the same as those of Dr. Sahai. And I say to myself, how can we cultivate mindfulness practice, and which generates all those benefits that we've talked about? So first, what is mindfulness? You know, I was in the grocery store the other day and I saw this. It says mindful mayo. And I was surprised. I didn't know if the mayo itself was mindful, or if perhaps I would become more mindful if I ate it. I just bought 2 jars just in case. I've also seen this advertisement, mindful meats. And again, are the cows mindful? Shall we be mindful if we don't eat the meat? I don't know. I've also seen this advertisement in my local grocery store, the mindful nut. And you can see it's starting to form a pattern here. It's undoubted that when marketers have seized upon a concept, it must be something of importance and of currency and importance in our larger culture. As they say, art does follow life sometimes. And so mindfulness must be terribly important, but what is it really? It's become so ubiquitous and well recommended. It's like that advice, the age-old advice, you should eat more vegetables. Everyone goes to the doctor and they hear, well, you should eat more vegetables. It's considered to be universally beneficial and helpful advice. And so let's break it down a little bit and say, what is mindfulness? Now, there are several ways that people use the term. Certainly, it refers to a trait. A person can have trait mindfulness where they just, in a dispositional way, tend to be more aware, less judgmental of themselves. But mindfulness also refers to a set of techniques, like specific things that you might do, like have breath-focused attention. A third way that people talk about mindfulness is the state of awareness that results from the application of a technique, or what happens to you when you're actually practicing mindfulness, whether that be in a formal practice or in your daily life. Mindfulness is, as so many of the speakers have said, it's related to a range of benefits. And there are thousands of studies that show that it's useful for stress reduction and for improving mental and physical health, and for promoting lots of different types of self-regulation. And they are practices that are accessible and acceptable to people from all walks of life. And so I've asked myself, why is that? Why is it that sometimes if I go out into the community or I go into the clinic, why do people catch on so quickly? Why, and get a response sometimes even from a few moments practice? And I think it's because mindfulness is a natural capacity that is neurodevelopmentally acquired. You might have noticed that as kids grow up, they develop the ability to maintain the continuity of their present moment attention. And I always think of my daughter when she was 2, you'd be going to the grocery. And so you'd put her shoes on and say, now we're going to go get in the car because we're going to the grocery. And so, you go in and strap in the car seat, and we get to the stop sign and she'd look around and she'd say, where are we going? And it was this adorable way that toddlers are in the very moment that they're in, and they don't necessarily have this continuity over time. And it was an absolute delight to watch her as she developed and developed that capacity to just maintain her attention over time. So it is something that's part of our standard equipment that we come with, is that our brain gets better integrated, and we're better able to pay attention and make observations. Mindfulness practice is tied to the development of self-regulation of attentions, emotions, thoughts, and behavior. And it shouldn't be surprising, because if you can control where your attention goes, you can self-monitor yourself better. You can be more aware of emotions. You can interfere with avoidance that causes people to sometimes become overstressed without realizing it. And so in that way, using mindfulness practice for self-care takes us down the pathway of self-development. And so just like other developmental capacities that we might want, or we might develop as either as a product of time and maturation or through practice. So if we're going to talk about what we mean by that, I think it's important, if we're having mindfulness as an aim towards self-development and the development of these capacities that are our natural birthright as humans, then we have to talk about what is meant by practice. Because certainly in a lot of the settings where mindfulness is used nowadays, they talk about different usage intensities and different kinds of techniques. So there's practice in daily life, which is called informal practice in some traditions. And there's also dedicated practice periods, like formal practice. You might think of an example being a sitting meditation. And so some scholars have done a follow-up of people who took mindfulness-based stress reduction classes and found at follow-up that the most common form of practice was practice in daily life. That's that moment where you take a breath and you say, I'm going to spend just a moment here paying attention to my breath. And it was the most common use, but it was not correlated with people's improvements from pre to post in the program. So certainly bringing mindfulness into one's daily life is necessary to enjoy the benefits and to actualize it in our lives. But the benefits do result from practice over time. So and it also is true that the amount of formal practice that people do is correlated with the benefits that they get, and that's been shown across a set of studies. And so now the problem comes is that how would we do what Dr. Sahai asked us to think about doing? How would we develop the ability to concentrate and to focus and to make time to practice? So it's helpful sometimes to think about development as occurring across a trajectory, and different activities help you at each step of the way. So those uses of mindfulness in daily life, I think of them as serving the purpose of distress reduction. So often the example you hear is to just take a breath, and in a stressful moment, take a breath, center yourself, perhaps think about what's the most important thing now. And that is those momentary practices, some call micro practices, that people do, and they frequently serve the function of momentarily reducing our distress, sometimes helping us to redirect our attention to the present moment, get focused, to interrupt dysregulation of various kinds, like a mind that's going off in a direction that you don't want it to. It also promotes calm. Over time and with practice, the use of mindfulness in daily life, these micro practices, in combination with some formal sitting practice, leads to the development of skills so that a person can then routinely in their daily life and in periods of meditation begin to notice the flow of their attention, redirect their attention to the present when they want to. They can self-monitor themselves better. So as you're paying attention and regulating your attention better, you start being able to say, wow, I'm getting really stressed now. I'll need to take some actions. So that self-monitoring is so important for self-awareness and awareness of other people's feelings too. And it gives us the space and opportunity to actively self-regulate during stressful moments. Because if you're self-monitoring, you can kind of see things coming and see things developing, and then you can choose to take other actions than you might normally take if you weren't so aware. And over time and with practice, people develop very stable new capacities for sustaining present moment attention, no matter what's going on, for regulating their stress physiologically. One of our studies, randomized control trials, showed that people who did the inner resources for stress practice had better HPA axis functioning, that part of our physiology that regulates our reactions to stress, was improved for people who were in the mindfulness and meditation condition. And so that leads to, there's a cascade effect that leads to a lot of other new capacities that people can count on. So how do people learn these skills and develop their capacities? And how would they choose the techniques? What would be the best thing? So I have some ideas about that, because this has been my central thing, is because it works if you work it, so how in a short time that we have to work with people, how do we teach them in a way that they will actually find useful and will promote their growth? So I want to share a heuristic that is actually based on some work that a psychologist named Vygotsky developed. And it was really about describing how kids develop cognitively. But I thought it was such an interesting thing that I could apply it to understanding how we learn new mindfulness capacities. And so if you think about this inner circle as representing things you can do on your own right now. For example, some people might have the ability to be aware mindfully of their own stress and use breath awareness to reduce their distress as it rises too much. The Vygotsky zone of proximal development is those things that you could do, but you could do them if you had enough support and scaffolding to do. So he called that the zone of proximal development. Those things that you could do with appropriate scaffolding or support and challenge. Now, my students call the zone of proximal development the zonut. And so I'm going to use that language and say, working the zonut means where you have a commitment to your own practice and your own development. And you say, what do I need right now to support myself and challenge myself to take that next step? And the example might be to be aware of your own stress, but also be aware of positive emotions at the same time. Kind of challenging to be in a really tough spot and also to appreciate and enjoy other aspects of the situation. Might not be something that, you can hop out of bed and do in the morning, but with practice and with the use of techniques, the optimal use of techniques, you could reach for that next level of development, whatever it is for you. And the third circle are things you cannot yet do, but you will. Now, the reason why this is important for developing a mindfulness and meditation practice and capacities is because there's so much writing in meditation about advanced stages. And so people often begin by expecting and wanting to have those ultimate experiences and the ultimate kind of realization or self-mastery. But self-mastery is achieved over time. And so I say, please respect your zonat. Deal with yourself in a very patient, kind, and compassionate way, because with practice, you do develop. And in this illustration, you can see that inner circle, those things that you can do on your own, rapidly expands. So things that were difficult before become very easy with practice. And you can continue to scaffold yourself. So what is meant by scaffolding, and what would you be doing if you were trying to optimize your practice? Remember that in running a clinical trial, I have only a certain amount of weeks for a person to get a benefit. It can't be the case that in 2-3 years, I hope that they've started meditating, right? It's a zone. There's a timeline that I have to respect and observe. So I developed some ideas about how to match practices to suit our growth the best. And so this approach means certainly having active engagement in your own mindfulness and meditation. It's not goal-oriented or results-oriented. We certainly maintain a stance of curiosity, non-judgment, and engagement. But we do, the challenge part of the scaffolding is to challenge our avoidance of very difficult aspects of our experience. Be kind to yourself and also be willing to grow at all times. I'm waiting for it to shift. So in this idea of scaffolding, with too much support for ourselves, we're complacent and there's very little opportunity to learn. But too much challenge makes it hard to learn new things. So it's the balance of support and challenge. So how would we scaffold our own practice so that we can work our own wherever we are on the zone on that particular day? By technique matching. And there's 4 ways I want to talk about technique matching. One is to respect our need for structure, our tolerance for experiential engagement, our own preferences and learning style, and what is our current state. And note that these can all change from day to day. It's part of what makes the meditation practice so interesting. The need for structure, generally speaking, the more stressed and distressed we are at a particular moment, the more structure we need in our practice. I've worked with a lot of people who are extremely stressed and even traumatized. And I have found that the standard instruction to please just sit and watch your breathing for a moment is not enough for them. If they could do that, they wouldn't need trauma therapy, or they wouldn't need necessarily clinical attention. But when people are extremely stressed and traumatized, they need more structure and more safety. And so using practices that require an attentional focus and some deliberate active attempt to complete a sequence of practice is really helpful for introducing that kind of structure that helps anchor our attention. And so in the Inner Resources for Stress program, we have practices like Gadi Tour and tension release. And over time and with practice, we're increasingly able to rely on less structured forms of practice. There's also engagement. So avoidance and disengagement from our present moment experience are certainly very common reactions to stress and challenge, and I'm not against them. But, on the average, sometimes distraction, if you're getting a needle stick for something, well, distract yourself for a second and it'll be over. It can be a useful distraction, can be useful, but for the most part, being avoidant and disengaged of our own feelings and of others tends to take a toll. So creating more engagement with means using specific techniques and kind of titrating how much engagement we can tolerate. So for one thing is refraining from using practices like distraction and fantasy, which some people do feel like are forms of mindfulness. But those activities direct our attention away from the present moment. Imagining yourself in your happy place is not really a mindfulness thing, right? Because it's directing your attention away from the present moment. Using practices like the letting go practice to modulate responses as they come up. Letting go is you taking a breath into something and this making a deliberate effort to experience it and let it pass. We can also become more engaged by practicing with eyes open and having a lowered gaze instead of keeping the eyes closed. And also just keeping an attention on body and breath awareness. And using visualization practice might not be helpful for people who are having difficulty staying hooked into the present moment during their meditation practice. And this is just a quick thing. I won't show it, but it shows that you can distinguish a lot of different kinds of attentional uses of attention and mindfulness practice along these two axes of engagement and structure. Also, just respecting what is your preferred style, what do you resonate with, and what do you like to do? So breath-focused attention is something that appeals to a lot of people. Other people like to observe their physical sensations, or they like to use some breath-linked visualization, like imagining the lungs filling up like two balloons. There's also linking the breath to attention, so you can move the locus of your attention, like now pay attention to your feet or your ankles, and you can link your breath to that practice. Again, it's a very structured way. It gives your mind a lot to do to sustain you and to keep you engaged. And also verbal mediation, like counting breaths and mantra repetition, are also aids to meditation. We should also note, what is our current state? Certainly, if we're overly activated, overly stressed and anxious, just taking a practice of paying attention to our breath may be overly activating. You may feel that your breath feels very rapid and shallow, and so lowering the attention is helpful, using some gentle breath modification, like taking a deep breath and slowly exhaling. Some others may prefer to just note bodily sensations, such as feeling their hands or the sensation of sitting in the chair. So using active and structured ways helps regulate our overwhelming activation and just make a better match for us in that moment. If your current state is dealing with underactivation or even depression, at such times it's helpful to breathe more fully and to really expand and sometimes retain the breath very fully. And complete breath is an example where it's counting the 3 parts of the breath and imagining that the breath is filling up like 2 balloons. Now, to make the most of technique matching, acknowledge on different days we feel different, where our zona can expand and contract on a particular day. And so by checking in with yourself in mindfulness practice, you just take note of how you feel today, and you can use these techniques to flexibly respond. And so I don't write off any techniques as being not useful or no good. It might just not be the thing for right now. And also make a connection between what you did and how you felt later. I don't mean you have to evaluate or grade yourself. That's not helpful, but saying, how did that affect me today? So happy practicing. And again, thank you for inviting me, and I can take some questions now.
Thank you, Dr. Lin. Thank you for reminding us to be kind to ourselves, because only when we are kind to ourselves, we can extend this to others. Thank you once again. So we have some questions. We can take it quickly. Dr. Lin, can you read it in chat box? Yeah.
Yes, in the chat box, I see that someone has said, like, muscle memory, is there a mindfulness memory which can take over like autopilot, which can be developed through self-development tools that you covered in your presentation? And that is, yes, exactly what I meant. That as we practice and as we move from momentary uses of mindfulness to developing a regular practice, we develop those skills and capacities, and they stay with us, and they come to us, even at our most difficult times. I've noticed, I watched a basketball game once, and I noticed that the basketball players practice dribbling the ball so many times before the game begins, even though they've done it so many times. And that shows us how practice ongoing, even with expertise, is important, so that you have your moves ready when you go in the game.
We can see a hand raised, Dr. Rajendra. Can you please write down the question or unmute yourself and ask?
If I can talk.
Yes, Dr. Rajendra, please go ahead.
Okay. My experience has been that I'm also a mindfulness teacher. I try in most difficult cases to carry out the breathing exercise or breathing along with the client. With your eyes open, you can see them, monitor them, and sometimes I take that pictures of their face, and after 5 or 10 minutes, I take a picture again and show it to them. Look, this is how your face has changed. So that's one way of winning them over to mindfulness. It really helps. It really makes changes because they are not in a awareness state that can notice these changes. So this is what my experience has been. Would you like to comment on that, Dr. Lynn?
I would, and thank you so much for your comment. I didn't hear everything that you said, but it does remind me that when you're leading a mindfulness practice for someone else, that it's really important to check in with them and say, how did that go? And it's not for the purpose of evaluating them or saying you did it wrong or here's how to fix it, but it's to help the person self-reflect, and that you as the teacher or the leader of the group gets an idea of how they're using the practice, so that you can, if needed, make some adjustments. So it's terribly important what you're doing, Dr. Rahendra.
Thank you. We have the last question for the session. How can we easily be aware of our stress and positive emotions at the same time? Practicing scaffolding and engagement isn't difficult to practice?
Well, that is actually a really good question. The idea is that we have to start from where we are now, that we can't compare ourselves to some ideal of meditation or some advanced state. Mindfulness means checking in with where we are right now and starting from where, because you can only start from where you are now. And those were only examples of a challenge that a person might want to address with their mindfulness practice. I've worked with a lot of people who just struggle to experience anything except for negative feelings. And so sometimes just sitting and noticing that that's what you're experiencing, that is something that they can do on their own. And with and in the context of a group, and in the context of a teaching relationship, then sometimes people can begin to experience other things too. So what that will be is fluid for us at every moment, about what would it take to commit myself and use my practice now to let go of whatever tension that I'm holding so that I can reach for the next step.
Thank you, Dr. Lin. We will move ahead. So recharging morning it has been. Insightful experience of speakers and remarkable attention from our listeners, who actually have made it a success, and who wish the same energy for all other sessions ahead today and tomorrow. Here I would like to take an opportunity to thank you everyone. Dr. Vinita Sahai, the Director, IIM Bodh Gaya, Dr. Nidhi Mishra, Dr. Tina Bharti, the conveners, all of our keynote speakers, Professor Richard, Mr. Scott, Mr. Fernandez, and Dr. Lane. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, my faculty colleagues, students, every staff member who are present here and on virtual platform. So now we will be taking a few minutes break, and you all will be guided to your presentation at 11:30 sharp. You must have received the links for your presentation. In case you face any difficulty, please do reach us. As Vinita ma'am said at the starting of the session, that it's not that we can't concentrate, it's that we are practicing something wrong. Rather than practicing attention, maybe we are practicing distraction. So I would like to finish with this quote. Mindfulness is not difficult. We just need to remember to practice it. Wish you a great learning experience and have a very great mindful day ahead. Thank you, everyone.